2022 Finance Committee meeting. Do a quick roll call. Mr. Skoukis. Ms. Bissell. Mr. Nabholz.
Here.
Mr. Fisher. Here. All right. Please stand for a moment of silence and a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay. Is there any public comment for agenda items? We receive anything in advance? Okay, great. May I have a motion, please, to consider approving the agenda from our previous meeting?
Second.
I'm out. The agendas for this meeting.
Thank you very much. I actually jumped ahead.
Yeah.
May I have a motion, please, to consider approving the agenda for this meeting?
Second.
Comment? Motion moves by a count of 3-0. May I please have a motion to consider approving the minutes from the October 19th, 2022 meeting?
Second.
Any comment? Motion's approved 3-0. And we're moving on to our monthly reports. This is a sad one. This is a sad monthly report, though.
It's a sad monthly.
It's a sad one because Rich isn't here to deliver it, but
Rich isn't here to deliver
I
it.
know you can get the job done.
Well, and I apologize. I'm having a little trouble getting the reports out of the system. Rich was much better at that than I am.
Holding you captive.
Yeah. And so I'm working. I can get something out, but I can't get out what you're used to seeing. And so we'll get that to you.
Well, do we have it in our packet?
You don't. So I'm going to give you an oral report real quick.
Got it.
Okay,
And
good.
then I'm not going to go into quite all the detail that Rich went into. Some of it is actually stuff that repeats every time you meet. I think the thing that I would like to talk about are just a couple areas of concerns. And so that we talk through those, because that's really what
Yeah,
I think
it's
you're
more
most concerned
diagnostic.
about, right? So income wise, we are lagging behind in two areas. And if I would have predicted where we were going to be at this time of the year, one, I would have probably predicted. The second, I probably would not have. The first one that we're lagging behind is other taxes, and predominantly, I believe that's going to come back. Right now, we're lagging behind in both LST and real estate. I think LST will catch up by the end of the year. We've had conversations with our tax collector for that, and Keystone is working on going after a couple of the organizations that we think had been lax, and we're getting that worked out. The real estate tax, if you've been watching the real estate market, it has basically, just come to almost a slowdown that we're really starting to see that impact in what we're getting.
This is the transfer tax.
This transfer tax. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, the real estate transfer tax. So it's not a surprise based on what's happened. I don't know that we would have predicted that it would have slowed this much at this time. And what I'm hearing is it's probably going to be slow through about March of next year, and then potentially pick back up. It all depends on who you listen to. Some people say it's longer than that.
Well, I'll be contributing in June.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
appreciate that.
I'm here to help out.
Yeah, we're counting on that. So, and it's interesting, you're actually one of several of our committees that is being impacted by people moving out of the area. And, I've been doing this 8 years, and this is the first year that I know of that we're having this much of an impact with people moving out, which is, I think it's just a sign of the community. And, we have a lot of folks that are hitting that retirement age or whatever, and they're taking and moving now. And so
I call taking a profit.
taking a profit. Yes, that too. And so I just share that. I think we're going to probably end up lower than what we've been anticipating hitting in that area. We're about 370,000 behind right now. And I anticipate that's where we'll probably end up somewhere around 250 off based on what I kind of see right now. It could be a little bit closer than that, but that's the real main area. The second area that we're behind, that I don't necessarily know whether we're going to recover on, is what's the permit fees and that stuff. And so that also has been declining. We can watch that over the last couple of years. It's starting to slow down. It's slowed down more this year than anticipated. I know that there's some dollars that are going to be coming in. I just don't know whether they're going to hit in December or whether they're going to hit in January for the BPG project. And so
That's the last phase.
that's the last phase.
Chester Pike and
Yes.
Ellis Drive.
Yes, that last phase. I know there's projects that are going to happen in 2023. There, all the fit outs of all those buildings, once they get built, that'll all be 2023. We've issued some partial permits for some of the projects over there, but there's a few things that are being held up, waiting.
Is that
to see.
primarily commercial, Steve? Or is it going to be a mix as well?
Well, commercial and office, if
Got it.
that's,
Yeah.
if that's the mix.
As compared to residential, which is
Residential has
all
already been built out over there. Or is
Not finished.
not finished yet, but is all kind of
Yeah.
started and working.
And then the next retail, is that ever going to show up?
Yeah,
It is.
yeah, that retail, that's what I'm talking about. Those permits, that's what's kind of hanging in the balance right now. Part of the reason why we haven't released them is we're waiting on all the sewer stuff to work out, and we're waiting on DEP. So if DEP gets done with their review between now and the end of December, we'll probably hit our budget. If DEP does not get done their review between now and the end of this December, we probably won't. So that's kind of where we are on those two areas. The other two areas that we're lagging a little bit behind, but it's more of a timing issue than anything else. The one is we're behind in other financing sources, and we just haven't had, and we'll do that. We typically do it at the end of the year. We have municipal authority reimburse the township for the work that the township does for the municipal authority. That's about 130,000. So that will catch that line item up. And then the other area is Comcast is always behind in their reporting. And so we have not received, we received second quarter, but we obviously haven't received third quarter, even though we're in November. We don't usually receive it until December. And then we won't receive the final for the year until like February. And so those numbers always tend to lag behind. They're on target. I'm not worried about any of those numbers. They may fall a couple $1,000s short, but we're not looking at tens of thousands or hundreds of
What is
thousands.
the franchise fee from Comcast? Roughly.
The dollar amount?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Comcast is roughly about 40, 45. Verizon's roughly about the same. And I anticipate, like I've been watching this, I anticipate that once we finish building out residentially, I anticipate that number not only will what I call stagnate and kind of level off, I anticipate it'll continue to drop off.
Right.
One of the things
People
that
pulling the plug.
I mean, multiple people that I know are making decisions not to continue having cable,
landlines.
wired connection. My wife and I changed this year, we stopped doing that. The dollar amount was more than what I was willing to keep spending for what I was getting. And so my guess is there's more people who are doing that. I know a lot of people that I know have started to make that decision. And as that happens, I anticipate that number will drop. But that's about 380. That's almost $400,000 a year that we have coming in that area. So that's one of those places that I watch where we are.
But the interesting thing is that the broadband numbers keep on going up, but the cable is what's taking. it.
Yes. Yes.
So it'd be interesting to see how that impacts. And there's no franchise fee from the streaming companies.
Yeah, correct.
At this point.
Well, I mean,
That's a-
the
that's a
franchise
registry.
fee is based off of what they're, the wires on the poles.
Yeah.
And so,
How do you
it's-
track it? Yeah.
you know, I mean, that's how we base that, but that's
Yeah.
where that's.
Going back to the transfer desk. Have you factored in next year's budget, this decline?
So, I mean, I've been trying to down that every year a little bit anyhow, because I knew as we were coming to the end of solicitors, we were coming to the end of some of these projects. I don't anticipate the housing turning over in the town at the rate that we were turning over with the new building, right? So we've been doing it. Have we done enough? I'm not sure. And I have, I believe if the market turns back up again, as they predicted at some point next year, I think there's some pent up, based on what I've heard, you know, and I could be, you know, there are some things that we guess at that the best that we're really doing is a guess, right? You know, you try to take market, which way it's moving and those kind of things, and you try to take that into an account into account, but it's you don't, you know, there's nothing that's like, oh, you're going to sell this many units at this price. I've yet to figure that piece out.
You know, I really think though, given the massive trend in the first quarter, 5 months of this year, that I think it's going to take at least until 2024.
Yeah.
For it to become half of what it was on the gold rush that we had.
Yeah.
So I really think any budget more than 20% of what happened in 2022 would be aggressive.
Well, it is aggressive then.
Yeah.
I will tell you, because we're keeping it roughly flat. Here's the thing that I will say. One of the things that I know is that we have put ourselves financially in a really pretty good spot that we can make decisions. I mean, like, I want to be smart. I don't want to over budget revenue and those kind of things. And I've been accused of actually under budgeting revenue most years.
Sandbagging.
Huh?
Sandbagging.
Sandbagging,
You're
yeah.
a great sales leader.
But that's also what's allowed us to do the capital projects and things that we've done over the last, 5 years or whatever. But we're also in a place that if we take a hit, we're financially in a position that I'm not going to have to be making management decisions of, do we keep employees and those kind of things? Because that's our biggest part of our budget. You know, if we stop having dollars come in, that's the place where we'll feel it,
Right.
first. It's, if I look at our numbers, our personnel is almost over half of our budget. And so when you start looking at that, it's a big number. And so we watch that pretty closely. And because that's the reason why I try not to overestimate what we need personnel wise, because I don't want to be in a position. I had to do that. I've had to lay people off. I've had to make decisions in that way. And it's hard and it's costly. And so I'd rather run a little lean and also try to estimate and plan well so that we don't have that problem.
Just the only thing I recommend you do is with the supervisors is to make sure they're prepared for that number to be much softer.
Yes,
Because they tend to be a little bullish because they like to be boosters of the community.
sure.
But I think the reality of, I hope it's not, but I just hope, I think that's going to be the reality of the market.
Yep.
This is probably the first year in a while you haven't had the unexpected large
Yeah,
real estate.
right.
Big
Yeah,
transfer,
it
Right.
is.
200, 300,000.
Right.
Wow, this is great.
Yeah, and that makes a big difference. It makes a
Right.
big difference. Couple quick things I'm going to just bring your attention to. I looked over expenses. We're well within where we need to be in every area. There's a couple areas that, if I would say I'm looking at something that's a little bit over, one is the street sweeper. Our repairs on the street sweeper have been higher than we anticipated. They're about double. We went from 4,000 to 9,000, so it's not going to break the bank. But it was a big, that was an area that we were over. The other area that we ended up being over, about $5,000 or $10,000 was insurance. everything else is trending
insurance
to
is-
be about right. Maybe we'll hit a couple things over. Right now, our revenues are 110,000 more than our expenses. I anticipate typically the end of the year, we have less revenue. You know, our revenues are
Yeah,
heavy in the
front-loaded,
beginning
yeah.
and later at the end. I anticipate we probably will end the year a little bit tighter than we have in the past. And maybe without any surplus this year. So that's kind of where we are right now. It really will depend. We did get 100,000 last night or yesterday that I saw was 99 for transfer taxes. So, you know, that'll help fill that gap a little bit. And the other thing will be the permits. If the permits come in, we'll be fine. And even then, just part of that, you know, we transferred $1 million plus from the general fund to the capital fund. So even if we get to looking at it, if you take the transfer piece out, we're still well within where we need to be. So anyway, just
Steve?
that's the kind of the
Steve?
overview.
The one, I know we've talked about this in the past, the one in the back of my mind that always is kind of lurking out there is the fire company.
Yes.
And I know there's obviously there's an arrangement in place where there's a recurring status meeting, how you doing, what's going on.
Sure.
Are things still the same, or are you getting any sense that they're hitting a wall?
So the fire company's been pretty aggressive in starting a junior firefighter group. And in doing so, they've actually been pretty successful. What we know is the challenge we've got, and this is the
Yeah.
good thing. Most of our young kids go off to college, right? And so when they go off to college, obviously they're not going to be here in town unless they happen to stay at home and go to college. But so that's probably, you know, if they don't come back to the community, then that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. But they're being aggressive in trying to keep volunteers. The township has been pretty committed to trying to help them out financially so that their fundraising doesn't take over everybody's time. So they can, I mean, one of the challenges with the volunteer firefighter is that I think they have to have 180 hours of training before they can ever walk into a building. And so, well, walk into a building that's on fire. Look, put that. make sure I'm clear on that. But you know, that's an issue, and so that really does put some pressure on volunteers, because that's a lot of time, you know, that's being committed to getting training, and it's not like they can do it. You know, most of our volunteers work, and so it's like they have to figure out how to do it, either take off work or do it in the evenings and on the weekends. And so it's a little different. I will say that in our currently in the budget, if the budget passes as it is, we are starting a fire department equipment replacement fund, just very similar to what we've done with the road program, very similar to what we're doing with the public works, you know,
Vehicles.
equipment. We're putting that in. Mind you, we think we need $250,000, $300,000 a year to be able to do that, because their toys are really expensive. And so, and I jokingly say they're toys, but you know, I mean, you look at a ladder truck, it's $1.2 million. You look at a fire, just a regular engine, it's about $1 million. The rescue truck is about 800,000. There's nothing cheap there, right?
Gadgets, right?
You know, I mean, the 3 vehicles are about $3 million. And so, and that's not counting what they need for like you know, their flaggers and things like that, you know, fire police and things like that. So we're working towards building that. We know there's a need for a new rescue truck, probably sooner than we'll build up the money, and sooner than we'll have the ladder paid off, but we're working towards something to see what we can do. If we can help keep the trucks taken care of, it helps with them with the fundraising, what they're really trying to get, you
Sure.
know.
You know, one thing I recommend we do, we talked many times about pilot payments from
Yeah.
supporting entities in the township. And if I remember right, if there's a fire at one of their facilities, the fire department actually goes to it, right?
It
So
does.
It would be nice to see if they would step up and support something like this.
Yeah,
as
we have
opposed
had
to
a,
hiding and
you-
not participating in anything.
we have a gentleman who's part of our community that has done fundraising and is, he deals a lot with what I'm going to say upper management, CEO type folks with what he does.
People like John.
People like John, and but he is actually joined the fire company for the purpose of trying to do some of
Oh.
that. And so
Good.
it'll be interesting to see what his success is and that. And so,
Great,
um,
awesome. Okay, thank you for that report on reports. Diving into new business. The first conversation is around action or discussing finance goals for 2023.
Yeah.
I recommend we table that till Alex is here.
Okay.
Next week or next month rather, unless you guys want to dive into a little bit. Also recommend that people come with ideas about that. Remember, the goal is SMART goals, something that's measurable, attainable. And it gives a chance. Now, does anybody have any thoughts based on this line item that you saw the other day? Perhaps even better.
Maybe, yeah, maybe one of the things that is that each member of the finance committee make sure that they, at the beginning of the year, decide they're gonna take on a specific task that we kind of identify. And what the objective is. So that everybody will have to do something. And it could be just the functions of the committee as well as other things, but maybe we can just kind of pin it down that way, baby steps.
Good idea.
if I would just give you some thoughts that I think that would help, obviously, we're going to hopefully have a new finance person early part of next year. That's my personal hope and goal. And
And by the way, to that end, one thing I did, I shared that news on my LinkedIn page that we're looking for a finance person, especially someone like you with the followership you have in that community.
Yeah.
So use your social media to let people know about it. I know of 2 people that were applying because of my LinkedIn thing.
yeah,
So
When do you, when do you get a recruiting fee on that?
you know, I wish I did. I worked in that space for a long time too, right? But anyway, let's just use that to raise awareness of what we're looking for.
Yeah.
so I
And
will,
that could be a really good, one of the objectives
Yep.
is somebody could say, look, we need to raise the visibility of the finance committee in social media venue. That's a perfect one.
Yep.
So what's the program? What are you gonna do?
Yeah, sure. Good.
so I just was going to say that, you know, related to that, we do have 14 resumes. I just reviewed them last
Ooh.
night. We hit our cutoff. And we have 14 resumes. We're going through that process. I think we're going to probably interview 5 to 7, something like that. So we're working through that right now with the recruiter. I will say that one of the things that I think as we go forward, that maybe will be something that the finance committee would be able to help this new person with. We're still obviously going to be finishing up and making recommendations related to stormwater, but we have a much larger capital piece that we really need to start taking a look at and really start building a plan long-term of how we're going to maintain and what we're going to do. We're aiming for that with the roads. We've got a plan with the vehicles. We've come up with a plan. But, when we look at parks and we look at some of these other things, we need to really start putting a plan and start putting things together. And so that may be something that the committee, be another small subcommittee that would start working with the finance person and helping through that process over time. So just throwing that out there is one of the things for you to think about as if I'm thinking about a little bit bigger project that would involve more activity than some of the smaller things that I think you could do on an ongoing basis. For instance, your social media presence and those kind of things.
By the way, I'd like to address the rumor. I did not resign to try to become the director of finance. Because the goal here is to keep Stephen in his job.
Give him help, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hi, I'm Jim Lancelot. I'm here to help. So let's think that through in preparation of the December meeting, and be ready to do that and knock it out. Any questions about that?
Good.
I think we all have good individual ideas, just sharing them collectively. is
Sure.
helpful too. Discussion regarding the 2023 meeting schedule. Is that
Yeah.
based on a recommendation you have?
Well, actually, we're putting a recommendation together before many of the committees. This was not actually going to be one, but I wanted to at least put it on there for a little bit of discussion. So one of the things we're trying to do is to consolidate nights on some of this, just because staff is out so many nights. And we're trying to make sure that, you know, I have camera people out now that we didn't have before. It's not just a staff member, you know, and sometimes it's multiple of us. And so we're trying to pick 2 nights a week that we tend to have meetings and put most meetings in, consolidate that way. That being said, I just wanted to touch base with this group. Is this time working? Does it make, you're the only group that doesn't meet in the evening. And so I just was trying to get a little bit of feedback, make sure that I've left it at this time. I hadn't moved the finance from this time, but I thought, you know, I should at least ask. I think the one downside we have is that I think the public that comes out to the meeting is probably pretty low at 8 o'clock in the morning,
yeah,
just
they're still
because.
Yeah.
Huh?
Turn your mic off.
So, I mean, if you look at it downside, that's a downside, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it makes it harder, but it's still an open public meeting, so it's not that somebody can't attend. And we're not trying to hide anything. We
And it's
record it. Huh?
Yeah, it's recorded.
It's recorded, it's put out on YouTube, all of those kind of things. So that is not, I mean, you know, my personal preference would be every meeting happen, but sometime
Right.
between 8 and 5. That would make my life a lot easier, but that's not reality in what we do. So that's okay. But, you know, at the same time, I want to be sensitive to this group. If this group came back and said, we really rather be looking at a different time, I would look at trying to put you on the schedule at a different time.
So 6 a.m. is not a good idea, is that?
6 a.m. is not a good idea. I can tell you that,
But
particularly if I have a meeting going until 10 or 11 the night before.
Well, I would kick it over to Lisa, since you're the one that's really going flat out with work, with Larry and I,
Yeah.
Jim. Is Alex retired?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know what Alex does, to be honest. I mean, I really don't know if he's working actively or if he's
Okay.
doing more
Punt
consulting.
on
or-
Alex, but I mean, it's really Lisa's call. I mean, is it easier to do an evening versus do this morning?
I like the morning.
Okay,
So, I mean, I'm more of a morning person, so.
Yeah.
if everybody
I'm
wants-
happy to leave it here. There's no pressure to change. Please
Got it, okay.
understand. It was just, we're checking in with all of the different committees, and I thought it would be amiss not to at least check in with you,
Mhm.
and we'll continue to do that. So I won't make any recommendation to the board to change it.
Got it.
Okay.
The other good thing about it appears that by having it 8 a.m., the supervisors aren't attending as much. So I think that's positive. Anybody have an issue with that?
Wake Leonard up. He's on mute.
He's on mute, I know.
Somebody-
Nah, I agree. And let's face it, sometimes it's just easier because days tend to run long. You have something at 0800, stuff gets in the way, but it's not like, oh crap, I got to get to that meeting.
Yeah,
If you have to run to get to this meeting, you have a busier life than most.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we dive into old business, I have something to bring up related to old business. And of course, I hold in my hands the newsletter, which again, I like a ton. But one thing I recommend, we talked about this before, when it comes to our stormwater issue, I really recommend we create an issue about the stormwater. And that the next newsletter that comes out, like, as much as I love the logo for my community, the bridge, I really recommend that we take advantage of that in this next newsletter to feature the stormwater, not what we're doing about it, but to feature it and what we need to do about it. You know, and really start that conversation with the community and come out and say, guys, this is staring us in the face. We've got to do something legislatively and for the benefit of the town and township as a whole. We got a lot of stuff to do. I'm not even recommending we talk to people about what we're thinking about doing, say, look, but stormwater is an incredible issue in this township. And really start the conversation and continue it as newsworthy things come up. For example, when our recommendation comes up. And do that, again, this is a quarterly newsletter. if I'm
It
not
is.
mistaken. So take advantage of the winter issue. Because actually, winter's a great time to talk about stormwater because of what happens post big snowstorms.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just my recommendation. I don't know how you run your editorial calendar for it, but this is a great place to start. And then also to leverage that with what happens on FaceSnap and other social media pages. Because short of there being a health department issue at a local store, you know, there's not much going on in this town. So the more we can go ahead and talk about stuff, the faster we get ahead of it.
Yep.
Because the rumor and innuendo is awesome on Facebook. So, but use it, leverage it as something to take advantage. That being said, let's jump into our issue. Last time we spoke, the idea was, hey, do we come in and talk about a straw model of a presentation? And I know when Alex told us he couldn't join us today, he said he's happy to review it. Two questions I have around that, Stephen. One is, can we review materials collectively offline before a meeting and come to the meeting with our comments and thoughts? Individually, not collectively.
I was gonna say, individually, you can always review materials ahead of time.
yeah.
Collectively, no, you can't. And so, that would be my only comment to that.
Got it.
I know that, Lisa and Ed have worked on a presentation.
Yep.
We're actually, we met Friday, I think it was. And we're trying to pull some stuff together. I've got some information to get back to them. Steve has been doing some research with the communities around us. That question. So far, the ones we've heard back from, there's only one that's adjacent to us that has a stormwater fee, and that's Radnor. I've looked at their fee briefly. Interestingly enough, they have two different measurements. For homeowners, it's based off of acreage. For commercial / anything else, it's based off of impervious coverage. Very, it's interesting in how we've talked about the whole process and what we've looked at. So anyway, something to think about, something for us to add to the mix.
Steve, I don't know if we're in a position that maybe we could share the draft and just kind of give Larry and Jim kind of like what we have, what we know, and what our unknowns are to get some input in that regard. So I don't know if we can do that or we're permitted to do that in this meeting.
You are permitted to
Yeah,
do it because it's on the agenda, so you can definitely do that.
I just don't obviously have control.
Is this the one that? This is the one that
we revised, Lisa revised? No,
I don't think this is it.
no, this is one of the
No,
attachments.
That's the attachment that's on the.
That's one of the attachments.
Yeah, no,
I could find, it was,
so if I
wanna-
log
What I
in,
want to get out to the group is that we have there's an obvious path, but there's some hurdles to it. And I want to get the hurdles out to the group so that they can start to think about, well,
Yeah.
what about this? Could we possibly do that? That type of thing.
Lisa, are you sending that to me
I
again?
just sent it. It was-
Can you send it to me?
Oh, yeah.
Are you logged in?
Is it the one from August of
you-
2022?
No, it's.
Can you
just
get your
a-
email?
Oh, so we don't have that, we don't have that. That's not the one I reviewed last night.
I do have some numbers
That
for
we
you all
can
that
kinda-
George has reviewed.
Right.
I got them yesterday. I just
Yeah, this
didn't
is
get
like a
them.
dynamic.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Here we go. Perfect. You want to
Yeah,
do
I
it?
will, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so as Ed mentioned, we really want to get feedback to see if our approach, what you're thinking about our approach, and if we should add slides, put new information. There's, get your thoughts and feedback. So the way that we've summarized the presentation is, the first slide summarizes the simplest, well, first slide after the cover page. It summarizes the simplest, quickest way to raise $1 million through either a tax or a fee to get started on funding these stormwater projects. And in addition, on the next slide,
Well, no, let's just stay with that for a second. Just as a backdrop. We all know that we need a lot more than $1 million, but we realize
Easy.
it's a dynamic,
Yeah.
so therefore, okay. So it can be evaluated on an annual basis. Do we need more than $1 million? Will $1 million do it? We can bankroll some of the $1 million and not spend it this year. But we just had to start somewhere. So rather than asking for $15 million, we said, let's just start at the bottom and we'll do $1 million. And then why don't you hit the highlights, Lisa, real quick, because I realize it's hard to see without having it in front of you,
yeah,
in terms of the flat.
okay.
So go through
Yeah,
each
open it up a
kind
little more
of
so-
line.
Yeah, so I'll hit this, and we
Oh.
did get into this, I think, at the last meeting too, as far as these numbers. So basically, to raise $1 million via a tax, the annual flat fee per parcel, or flat tax, sorry, per parcel, would be $179. That would include the tax exempts.
No,
The
the tax
No,
side is,
it
the
would-
tax side is the, no, it would exclude the
It would
tax. exempt.
exclude the tax exempt.
Right, because the fee side has the tax exempts, and you can see, because we have, relatively speaking, a small number of tax exempts. So the flat fee drops to 177. So we have a $2 difference on an annual basis, which is obviously immaterial, but politically, it has a totally different dynamic to it.
Yeah, sorry about that. I flipped those on Friday too, so.
Right.
I will get those right. That's my goal in life is to get that right for sure. So, okay, then, the next item talks about.
Stay up.
Actually,
Okay,
can I say
Yeah.
something about this real quick before you get pointed? Here's something I recommend. The term tax and the term fee. Okay, they're both taxes.
No, they're not.
Now, I know, I understand the legal definition of that, but if I'm someone who's paying something, I'm being taxed to pay it, all right? I understand where we're coming at. I recommend we lose the words tax and fee. I recommend we come up with some other term for both of those things. Because we're gonna try to sell this in the community as well. And we need to, my recommendation is we consider terms. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, you could use a term like charge, which
Yeah.
would, which is so generic. And, when you want to get into the details, you can get into the details. You
Correct.
can use something like the word charge. That would.
Yeah, but I think that if the purpose of this is to present to the board the options, I think you don't want to get it so watered down that you confuse the board about what you're doing.
No, that's fair, but I'm
The-
also talking
just-
about, I'm
Yeah.
talking about the community.
Well,
No,
yeah,
I
I mean, that may
understand.
be step two, Jim, in terms of what we actually.
I hear what you're
verbiage is
saying.
Put out to the community.
That's a fair point. I appreciate that. That's a
Yeah.
good point. Okay, go ahead.
and I should have started by saying you can raise this $1 million through a fee, or through a tax, or through some hybrid. And
Yeah.
that's sort of what we've been.
Yeah.
Talking about throughout this.
No, but at the same time, though, we gotta make a call. And by doing this the way you're doing it, I think we're closer to making that decision, what we're recommending.
That's
So
correct.
I think the path you're going down is fine.
Okay. Okay, so I want to stay because I want to hear if Ed wants to add more to that first item.
No, the
about-
first line across is good.
Okay, so then we go into generate 1 million of revenue and what the increase in assessed value would translate to.
This would be under the tax model.
Right, and so what we found is if we raise $1 million through an annual tax increase, that the tax would range from $27.70 to $277 and per parcel up to $1 million, and 75% of the taxes would affect residents by $140 or less.
Yeah, let's stay with that for a second, because there's a lot there. What we've determined is, we have a wide range of assessed value in the township, as you would obviously expect. So in order to generate $1 million, the actual tax rate change has to be uniform. So we can't charge somebody with an assessed value of $1 million higher than somebody with $100,000 assessed value. So it has to be a constant. But as you drill into it, and there is a grid in the back, but I don't want to get into that grid today. We'll be here until noon.
gonna say, it's nice.
There is a grid. You gotta look at it at home and you'll see it. It takes a little while, but then you'll see it.
Yeah.
What we're getting at is, what is the effect of $1 million tax increase across the population on assessed value, and who does it fall on? So you can see the 2770 number, that's an annual tax increase. That's for the $0 to a $99,999 group of assessed value. So they're gonna pay roughly 2770. Now, if somebody's assessed value is $47,000 versus $87,000, the $87,000 assessed value is gonna pay a little more. But we had to somehow or other bracket it, but we'd have 5,600 different assessed values.
Right.
So it moves from the 2770 a year up to 270, is it
277.
277, where you have up to $1 million, 999,999 is what that group would pay, that $100,000 bracket would pay. Then we have assessed parcels that are much greater, $1 million or more, and some of them are much more than $1 million. They'll pay more. So they'll be beyond the 277. So I don't want to sell the 277 as a cap. It's not a cap. It's just trying to explain where the vast majority of this tax increase, who would it fall on?
That makes sense.
Then what we did was we said, well, what does that mean on an overall basis? Well, we said, as Lisa indicated, we said about 75% would pay no more than $140.
I think that's where you really need to consider. We're looking at stormwater assessment, we're looking at spending X million dollars a year. Because that number is specious if there's no way we're only going to spend $1 million a year for the next 5 years. It's a specious number.
Oh, no, I understand.
Right,
It
I
can be
think-
misled. Somebody will
I-
say, wait a minute, how come I'm paying more than
Right, I think, I
140?
think you figure out how much you're spending, you're gonna spend a
Right.
year. Because to say this is a good way to go,
And then the bill
Big-
comes.
yeah,
Right.
then, because I,
No, that's great, John. Yeah, you can see we've got multiple variables that come in, and that's why this has been, you would think it would be easy to summarize. It's not. And so and then you don't want to send the wrong message by somebody saying, hey, wait a minute, you told me I wasn't going to pay any more than $140. That's correct. Right, so we have to have, 15 asterisks with it and all the footnotes and all the stuff. But see, again, we're gonna have to, clearly, we're gonna have to refine this with all of the conditions when we make a representation. I call that a representation statement. We have to put our conditions either with it or at the bottom, somewhere or other, So we've got that caveat there. Because again, this thing could become, we could have 37 footnotes on this one page if we let this thing go. That's how complicated this is. Under advisement, that's a really good point. The other issue about this is the key that we wanted to make was that what does this mean for the township as a whole? Rather than me individually, of course, I care about me individually. What does it mean in relationship to the township's budget? It's a 16% increase on an overall basis. Now, that 16% is again, on, it could be on a small number, on a small base number, or it could be on a big base number. Where are you in the assessed value range? Again, this may be another number that could be misread in terms of the 16%, but that's what it mathematically works out to be. Now, who it falls on and how much and all that, devil in the details. So again, this is just to raise $1 million. So then you want to say, well, we know we're going to have to raise $10 million over 5 years. And you could overlay that as part of summary presentation or that type of thing, so that you could kind of put the total parameter on people, not on an annual, but on a 5-year. People generally think I would just say that. Some people go paycheck to paycheck, month to month. But some people look at things within a 2 to 5 year range. Like, where am I going to be in 5 years? Am I going to be in Florida like Jim? Or, what's going to go on? Who's this really going to affect? Okay. Then they're going to ask the question, what about the people that are renters? Okay. I haven't even got into that. How does this translate to people that are renters? Are they going to pay some of this? Or is it going to be indirectly through the landlord? How is this mechanically going to work? Again, now we're getting into the details. How does it mechanically work for a multi-unit building? How would that, will we need an example that has a building with 40 units in it, with renters in it? What does this tax increase mean, and to whom? Show some math. Sorry, I'm on a little bit of a roll here, too much.
No,
coffee.
this is good.
Now, we do have like I said, we do have grids in the back that show how this falls. But again, we're on the tax side of the ledger. If I roll over to the fee side of the ledger, we say, oh, fee per parcel could be based on impervious coverage, acreage. It cannot be based on assessed value. That's a mistake that has to be edited out. The reason why is any fee, any charge that's assessed on assessed value is a tax. And we can't impose a tax on the tax exempt.
And be honest with you, I think that's where you can get around the terms a little bit, so you can determine like assessed value and flat fee. Something like that to get you where you need to go, so you have assessed value or per parcel, so you can
Yeah.
you can manage the terminology that way to
Right.
make it a little more stomachable by people.
Now, here's the, Lisa, I'm sorry I did this over.
No, it's fine.
I apologize.
Good.
But we do not have per parcel data on the assessed value or the acreage or impervious coverage for all of the parcels in the township. We have a big data gap there. And you would say, well, that would clearly be, I think in general, especially for the residential customer base, they would say, why wouldn't this be based on acreage? And then you make adjustments for impervious coverage and who's put in stormwater mitigation systems and all the stuff that you've got to consider into this. It's because we don't have that data point. Okay.
Don't we have acreage?
It's what we've proved out is that what we get from the county is not accurate to the point we can rely upon it.
But you're saying that Radnor doesn't.
Yeah, so, I mean, what we're finding is that the communities that are doing it off of impervious coverage and or acreage. Spent a very long time, validating data. And, I mean, 2-3 years before they ever implemented, and the managers that I'm talking to or who are having this conversation. And trust me, there's a lot that are having this conversation. They're all having the same issue, you know, depending on what the county, you know, certain counties do a better job of collecting data and maintaining the data than others. Chester County happens to have a really great GIS
Bucks County,
department.
we found out is
Bucks
tremendous.
County has a really good one, but that's not the norm. That's the exception to the rule, not the norm. And so, you know, Delaware County has a lot of information, but it's not necessarily at the level that we would look at for to be able to confidently go in and say this is correct. And so we have to work through that first.
Lisa also
Okay.
mentioned the hybrid, which is, if you look on the tax column, it's the last one down, that you could do some type of a combination where you could have a tax, then you could have a special assessment in a particular district. If the particular project is going to create and can be justified a significant enhancement to that community where their value, their property value will be dramatically improved as a result of this expenditure. It could be considered as part of the plan to pay for that upgrade. Whether or not that would become obviously a supervisor's decision, but it's still on the table on the tax side.
Just looking at this, I'm thinking it would be nice to have some kind of visuals, you know, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of words on the page. And it's
Well,
hard when you're
But,
presenting.
you know, you guys have the information there. We can always move that into something.
Mhm.
I'm happy to help out with that,
Yeah,
right? But, you know, it's more important that you have the facts first and we can go ahead and create. the
well,
presentation.
Lisa and I, what we figured out is, okay, we need to start at the bottom and work to the front. And so we kind of view, Steve, could you flip to the next slide?
Yeah.
Because the next slide now will be helpful. These are the other variables.
I
Lisa,
can
you want
read
to jump in?
these,
Yeah,
yeah.
do this.
So a lot of this Ed already mentioned, but we're throwing these other considerations. Will it be required or desired to evaluate parcels based upon acreage and or impervious coverage? Will it be required or desired to address special ownership parcels such as HOAs? Will it be more or less desirable to administer the program under the township or municipal authority? And we have that exhibit attached on our advantages and disadvantages that we had done previously based on who administers the fee. And then we have a reference to the engineer's report on the
Which is
project,
dynamic,
which really,
always changing.
right, and it's on every slide to remind everyone this is why we're doing this, because we have an engineer study that says we've got projects that we have to finance.
As of this date. And if you go back a month, 2-3 months later, it'll change. Steve, next slide. Thanks.
Next slide is key facts, which summarize the number of parcels, the number of tax exempt parcels, number of acres, although you could see that there's a footnote there that some of these numbers have to be verified. And then we put a few highlights underneath, you know, number one, the ARPA funds, which were 1.46 million, have been allocated to the stormwater project. So it's showing the funds that have already been set aside for these projects and how much has been spent. A lot of those ARPA funds still are remaining to go toward those projects. And then we highlight the MS4 requirements, which do play in here because the township is required to perform projects in order to reduce pollution. And right now, I believe that the township is set to take on projects for $2 million over the next 5 years.
I think that's about right. We think, obviously when we go out to bid, that number may change, move one way or the other, but that was the engineer's estimate when we started.
And then we've got a question under that to say, is it legally permissible to use a fee or tax to fund stormwater costs above the MS4 requirement? That's something we would want the solicitor to look into.
Yeah, just stay with that for a second, because that surfaced when Rich was here and he looked at some verbiage in the statute and kind of put up the alarm bell. But as it relates to what we've discovered from places like what we've discovered in Radnor, I would be very surprised that there would be any type of statutory limitation that we could generate either through a tax or a fee, because they're doing it through a fee. And their MS4 requirement can't be really that much higher than ours. And yet with a 33,000 resident population, I don't know how many parcels are in Radnor, but they're clearly generating more than their MS4 requirement. So again, I'd be surprised if this limitation surfaced, but there's verbiage in the statute that needs clarification.
Well, the only thing I would say is just because our neighbor's doing it doesn't mean it's legal. And
No, to say, no, that's not gonna be, no, I understand, it's not gonna be our authority. But I would be a little hard pressed to believe that somebody was cavalier about instituting something like this without having the eyes. dotted.
Let me just say that having talked with different people, not everybody's solicitors is in tune to some of these things as our solicitor is.
Okay, I'll move along.
All right, and
Good,
then,
Lisa.
then we,
We need a new solicitor.
No, actually, I'm thankful for the fact that we have one that keeps us on the straight and narrow.
yes. So, okay, then we have a highlight just again about the lack of parcel specific data. And highlighting that gathering these details would be time consuming and expensive. And then we highlight the county's data on the HOAs and new developments is limited. And I think you can almost combine those last two
Mhm.
bullets, 'cause
Yeah.
they're saying the same thing. So yeah, I mean, the flow of this presentation is simplest, quickest way to generate $1 million versus through assessed value versus charge. Okay. Then what other considerations? We get into those issues that underneath are, very challenging regarding impervious acreage, all these different considerations. Then we talk about key facts, where are we getting this data? And then, from there, we were presenting it to supervisors and hoping they'll give us more direction based on this
Well,
exercise.
One of the things that I thought about that after I got myself out of the weeds was really what would it cost? And you could say you have internal time of the township employees as well as external time that you would need for some type of a consulting firm that could give us a accurate assessment of what it would cost to generate the acreage information and validate impervious coverage. What are we looking at? Is that something, let's just say with the external cost, is that something that's going to be a 50 grand job for somebody to come in and validate that and tell us based upon Google Maps and all of the other architecture that's out there? Or are we looking at $200,000? Because I would think the supervisors would want to know before they headed down a path, they would want to have an idea. If I'm going to do something other than a tax, how much is it going to cost me to get there? Is it worth it to do it? That's like the balancing act that any business person would go through.
Yeah.
And I think it would be very hard to put that decision on the supervisors without having a pretty good sense of what that number would be, without it being pinned down to the penny.
Yeah, well, and here's what I tell you, I think either case, we're probably looking at something that would require going out to an RFP to get the data. It's greater than what a quote would be, even if I got a quote,
You'd have
Um,
caveats to it.
I could get probably somebody to give us a ballpark figure. But just think about this, if a community which is bigger than us, but not a lot bigger than us. I think Radnor's like 15 square miles
Yeah.
versus 10 square miles. Which obviously, is 50% bigger, but if it took them several years to do that, you're probably not doing it for $50,000. Let's just put it that way. You're probably bringing in an engineering firm. You're probably spending a couple $100,000 a year. Just, to what I know, without even asking. I mean, we can start asking around what it would take and start getting some numbers. I think they're going to be probably less than what they would be if somebody was actually bidding, to be honest with you.
But why don't you just roll that into the total cost of the project and just pay?
Well, but because you gotta, I think Ed's right, that for the board to make a decision, they need to have an idea. I mean, just like you, if I was gonna say, should we do this or this? And you say, well, gosh, it seems more fair to do it off of acreage and or impervious coverage, but if I tell you it's gonna cost you $4 million to get that data,
Yeah, exactly.
you may say that the data is not, getting the amount for the data is not worth it. And it may be, it may be that we start this with a flat fee
Mhm.
for the purpose of determining what we should be doing. Because I have a feeling that this data would be beneficial for multi-purpose things going forward.
Well, it's the old line, is the hill worth the climb?
Yeah.
Right? And we need to sit there and say, if it's gonna cost us X dollars to do this the right way.
Yeah, right.
Is perfect the enemy of the good, right? Or we gonna waste X dollars to
Yep.
go get something that we probably have a pretty good stab at already.
Yeah.
And then, those guys can make that call, but just, you're right, it's not gonna be cheap to do it. But if it's repurposable information, number one, but number two, it gets you to the right answer. Three, frankly, gets you to a legally defensible approach. Sometimes you need to do that. Too.
Yeah, and that's the challenge.
So should we have a slide then that shows advantages and disadvantages of having this information?
I think you
If
should
I
have a
could-
slide that says, we can take two approaches. One is the one we've taken, or the second is a more deeply defined data approach. But to do that would make costs, $2 million and cost 12 lives. 7 lives. But something like that, it can, at least says, hey, you can make this call on what you want to do, because I think the way you guys looked at this is very rational. There's a million
Yeah,
different.
We're CPAs.
Look,
Don't hold it against
yeah,
us.
You guys are just,
We're
Very
just so
linear.
anal.
you guys never get punched, but I get that. But the idea behind it though is the approach you've taken is right. But if you want to take a more deeply data defined approach, you can do that. But what are you going to get? A point or two better at what you do? So,
I want
but
to,
at least to your point, I think you do that. Put together something.
in looking at this, I'm wondering if the first slide should be some of these pros and cons, not the number slide. I think that might be the last slide. Your first slide would actually be your second slide. What these issues are about acreage and impervious surface, explaining that. So when you get to the last slide that talks about, here's how we're gonna raise $1 million.
We don't know.
Well, we're doing this, but we
Okay, that's
don't, because
interesting.
we
All right.
don't have the acreage.
Yep.
So that would be work to this last slide.
We'll
Yeah.
dumb,
And again,
we'll dumb
put
it
which-
down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Jim is, so even before you get there, here's
Yeah.
what it would cost us maybe to get this information.
Yep.
So how, then we're gonna get to the number. So if we don't do this, we're kind of, it's just a, you know, just, the information's the same, just the sequence and might be different.
Yeah, I like that.
One of the things that I think, to Jim's point earlier, that's gonna be important is in the article that is in the Township magazine about stormwater, is to really explain what the problem is and where it is, to have a map that shows these are the spots in the township that the engineer has designated as a problem. What are those problems? Well, the problem is in heavy rains, these areas flood and we have to fix, that's what we have to fix, because the average township resident, when you say we have stormwater problems, may have no clue at all what we're talking about. And they could live in a part of the township that it rains and they say, oh, it's raining, that's it. Or they could be the ones that say, okay, there's flooding in my backyard, but.
Therefore, I gotta go out this way instead of that way.
Yeah, the first thing is a huge education issue. And
Without getting into the politics of where we're thinking about heading
right,
to pay for the mediation cost.
yeah,
Right, while they're just keeping it to the introduction of the issue in
Right.
more detail than what we've already just highlighted, I think, back in the spring.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then I think,
Yeah, using maps, maybe, you know, then they can actually look at it and then they can, you know, next time that we have a 2-inch rain, they can drive through and say, okay, I understand what they're getting at.
yeah, and then I
That's
think,
exactly what you want them to do. You,
Yeah.
oh, it's raining hard, drive down Bryn Mawr Avenue, or drive, you know, on this
Sawmill.
street,
Yeah.
yeah. You
Yeah.
Right.
you need to see it in that, you know, there's no problem here. And you go, yeah, there is a problem.
Well, driving is a 1/2-inch rain, then driving is a
Yep.
2-inch rain.
and then I think the next, I think,
That's good,
and
John.
correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a portion of this that could genuinely be added to when you talk about capital projects that are township flooding issues caused off of the side of township roads. That there's not every, there's some things where you have subdivisions that are passing water into the creeks that has nothing to do with public roads, but we have existing stormwater infrastructure that is not up to par that's causing flooding issues. That's what I mean by off of.
Yeah,
roads.
Yeah, you definitely have, you know, I mean, Bryn Mawr Avenue is a perfect example where the road itself, you know, the culverts and the things that are involved there, hopefully, which are going to be fixed
Right.
this week, I've been told, you know, those things matter and when they don't function correctly, that's what makes the road impassable. And then you have things that are more like, you might have a road issue like Boot Road and Goshen Road. If you've ever had the experience of being by the covered bridge during a heavy rain,
Mhm.
you don't continue on Goshen Road or you don't continue on Boot Road. Those issues are bigger than just what comes off of the roadway.
Right.
And so some of it's how is the draining happening on the roadway? A lot of it has to do with what we've looked at, the big projects are more neighborhood. And things like that, but you're right, there is a mix. And that's why some of our projects are actually state projects. Because they are on state roads and if we could clean up the culverts and things like that, it would make a difference. And then others of them are, like you said, are more neighborhood. There's not enough stormwater built into the neighborhood to handle all of the flow that comes off of all the properties, those kind of things.
Is there a success story that, you know, where we had a problem, we went in and the township fixed it and now the residents are happy? Like, is there something like that could be?
There are success stories where the township went in and fixed it. I'm not 100% sure how happy all the residents are. And so, but
Okay.
you know, we can talk about I mean, we did a project, we've done some projects that are that weren't necessarily capacity changing, but were actually repairs to existing that, made a difference. And we could talk about that. We're doing a project right now in Echo Valley that I'm hearing just really great things about, that people are very happy with the new culverts. That they're saying that they just look great. They feel like they've improved the value of their neighborhood and all of those kind of things.
We can send Jim out to do the on-site interview.
Yeah.
We can have the quotes and everything.
Exactly. That would be a good one. That would be a good one where I really haven't had anybody complain.
You get to spike the ball.
But,
It's still becoming.
we did it, well, a lot of times when we do these repairs, we did a major repair over on Green Valley, which is off of North Line Road down on the very far corner of the township. If you know where Media Line is, if you know where the line between Marple and Newtown, there's a little road there that
Yeah.
goes down. We did a big project there and this last year, and it was probably, I think it ended up being close to $100,000. And in stormwater, that's actually a small project, but it was a big project in that we had to tear up the road, and it was very involved. It wasn't just as simple to, just replace this pipe and move on. And I think the neighbors are happier, but it hasn't really solved the whole problem. We fixed a pipe problem, but we fixed the pipe, but it didn't solve the fact that we still have water in that neighborhood.
Rolling down.
So we've got to work on both sides. And sometimes we do the emergency fixes to get the worst of it done, but that doesn't fix the long term. So that's why I'm saying some things are truly road issues. This issue had nothing to do with the road. This repair was actually taking water from another location and making sure that it wasn't coming up to the surface before it got to where it was supposed to go.
So if I can I have to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we'll do a quick.
let's continue the conversation though,
Okay.
but I just have to go. So you guys wrap it up.
All right.
You have the gavel.
I have to go. Okay. So, and I know we got to get going on this. What I'm thinking, our next step is we'll continue to gather the detailed information. But I do like the idea of what Larry raised, that maybe we push more of the intricate details towards the back. And that we look at what John said in terms of where do we need to, if we're gonna ultimately have this become a public document, we need to identify where we need to put conditional disclaimers in so that people don't go back and say, you said $140, it's all I'm paying. That type of stuff.
Yeah. So here's a couple things. I think one is, I think it's appropriate to share this with the rest of your committee. Like get it out. We'll fix up a couple things we know that need to be fixed, get it out, let people start having a month or, to really kind of work on it, get some viewpoints. I think that it's appropriate to say we aren't going to present this to the board until probably the end of January.
Oh, yeah.
Based on where we
Next
are.
year, Yeah.
So it'll be next year. I think that you've talked about the education piece of just in general of stormwater and what we need to start doing there, and that should be a part of this. Like,
Well,
I
I'm going
think
back to goals.
that like part of that, well, but just even when I'm thinking in regards to like a part of your presentation should be the township needs to spend a really fair amount of time over the next year really communicating this, because I don't think this is something we're going to implement in 2023. I think this is something we're going to implement in 2024 or later. But so we should spend all of next year putting out information that builds us, I mean, that's what I hear you saying, and I think there's wisdom in that. And so as we build that and build the awareness of what the issues are, then we have the opportunity as we present to the board, as we do all of those things. People are going to be prepared to ask the kinds of questions that we would want them to ask, and they would have a better understanding why we're even having this conversation in the first place, and so I think there's some steps we can take in that. But I think if we do some internal cleaning up the document and get it out to the rest of the group. Let them spend some time with it, really kind of ask the questions. Then we can take the next steps. And, you know, maybe it isn't the end of January, maybe it's the end of February, but, you know, really start building what we want to do. But also at the same time saying, let's get this education piece going, because that's a big piece.
Yeah, if we're not committing on of the path, what the solution path is, then we can start education now because that's already in the public domain. We just have to highlight and accentuate it.
Mhm. Now, who would do that? Is that, because I know we've talked about a lot, that, you know, we're looking at how to finance this.
Yeah.
There's obviously a much bigger picture of the whole
So
issue.
I mean, I think
Policy issue.
I think there's a couple places we can go. One is we have an EAC, an Environmental Advisory Council. So one would be that. The other would be when we talk to our tree folks, when we say, hey, when you're writing an article related to trees, talk about the importance of trees with stormwater. Because it's the reminder that every time somebody cuts down, I mean, the biggest challenge that we have, somebody comes in and clear cuts their property, which they have the right to do, right? You have, as a homeowner, you could decide what trees you want in your backyard and what trees you don't. And so, you know, that's one of those things. But when you come in and you take out 75% of the trees there, you have a direct impact on stormwater. And people need to understand that. And so the tree folks could write an article on that side. And then you could talk to the EAC folks to talk about, you know, rain gardens and meadows and those kind of things and how they benefit that. And then we can talk about, you know, I can have maybe the engineer or myself or George write an article about just what the need is, you know, and we can talk, we can have a document that's related to stormwater. We can, you know,
The whole magazine, the whole one.
the whole,
newsletter.
we could do it, you know, multiple quarters this year. And say, at least every quarter for 2023, there's going to be an educational piece about stormwater beyond what we normally do. And because we do stormwater education in the air every year anyhow, because we're required to, it's part of our MS4 requirements. But really start talking about individual problems that we're having in the
Who
township.
owns the responsibility of that, Steve? Is that the township or is it one of the committees?
For what?
The annual education on MS4,
We own it, we take it.
township.
Yeah.
We have these bubbles of these committees, so I'm thinking, how do we cross communicate?
Well, so first of all, one of the things that I do, and I think you've been invited typically, and I'm working, one of the reasons why I'm working on getting a schedule again is because I've got so many nights that are taken up right now that we couldn't even find a time to meet regularly with the quarterly meetings I was doing with all of the committees, but I would like to do it every other month, is bring all the committees together and we have conversations just like this one. You know, here's the focus for this year is stormwater. And here's what we'd like you to work on during that process.
All right, so you would communicate back to those committees and then we could figure out, okay, this is going to be the forum where we can cross pollinate. So everybody understands what their responsibility is, what the objective is.
Correct.
Okay. Great. I think we're finished with old business items for the next agenda, for the next meeting. Are there any additional suggestions beyond what we've made today? I see none. Is there any public comment? Steve, anybody out there?
No, it would be what's here.
Got it. No public